The room they left her in had not had a shutter opened in 9 years, and Verity Hollis, who had been sitting in it the better part of an hour, had begun to learn the shape of it by cold alone. She could not see the ceiling. She could see where the tall folded shutters did not quite meet. One thread of grey January daylight, no wider than a bootlace, lying across the floor and up the leg of a chair, and by that one thread she had counted 4 chairs, a marble-topped table, a chimney-piece with nothing in the grate but a paper fan gone brown, and 11 pictures on the far wall with sheets over them, which she had counted twice, because there was nothing else in the world to count. Her father had gone into the library at 11. It was now 12:30. Nobody had come for her. Stainforth Hall had a south front 200 feet long, and every window in it was shut. Not curtained, shut, the inside shutters folded across and barred, the bars painted over, the paint gone the yellow of an old tooth, so that the folding of them had plainly not been undone in a very long time. She had noticed it coming up the drive, and had thought it a house in mourning, and had said so, and her father had said, without turning his head, 9 years, and not one shutter open on the south front. That is the sort of man he is. Sit up, Verity. She had sat up. Then the great door had opened on a hall like the inside of a cathedral with the candles out, and a housekeeper with a good grey face had taken her father away, and had put Verity in the northwest saloon, and had said, with a kind of practised apology, "I'm sorry for the dark, miss. We don't open this front. Might I have a candle? I'll fetch one, miss." Nobody had fetched one. So she sat. And then she stopped sitting, because Verity Hollis had a defect of character her mother had despaired of for 2 decades. When she was left alone with a thing that was wrong, her hands went to it. She crossed to the window in the dark, put her fingers on the shutter, and found the bar. It was iron, and cold enough to sting, and it did not move. The paint had grown over the hasp like ivy over a gate. There was a long iron hook standing in the corner by the architrave, 6 feet of it, black, with a little brass eye at the shaft. A shutter hook. There was a nail on the paneling for it to hang on, and it was not hanging on the nail, it was standing in the corner as though somebody had put it down 9 years ago, meaning to come back. She had it in her hands when the door opened. The light came in from the hall, 1 branch of candles, held high, and she turned with the hook in both fists like a woman caught poaching, and there was a man in the doorway who was not a servant. He was very tall. That was the first thing, and the only ordinary thing. The candles were on his left, so the left of him came out of the dark quite plainly. A long jaw, dark hair going iron at the temple, a black coat, a white cravat tied by somebody who had not cared. The right of him stayed in the dark, and was meant to. He kept it there. She understood that at once from the angle of him. He had come no further into the room than the light would let him, and he had come in on his left, and it was a maneuver so smooth and so old that it must have been done 10,000 times. He looked at the hook in her hands. "That is fastened," he said. His voice was low and rusty at the edges, like a gate not much used. "You will not shift it." "No," Verity agreed. "I had got as far as that." "Your daughter," he began, and stopped, because he had assumed and got it wrong. "You are Mr. Hollis's daughter, Verity Hollis." "Yes," he said, "you would wait in the carriage." Something went over her then, very cold and very quick, and was gone. "Did he?" she said. "Mrs. Tarrant will bring you a fire," he said. and a candle. I am sorry. This is not a house that has people in it. He was gone before she could answer, and the candles went with him, and it was another quarter of an hour before Mrs. Tarrant came with a branch of 6, and a boy with a scuttle. By then Verity had put the hook back in its corner, and sat down and folded her hands, and had begun because she was a clergyman's daughter, and because the arithmetic of her life had always been done by other people in rooms she was not in, to be afraid. Her father came out at 1 o'clock with his face shining. He talked the whole 11 miles home, about Providence, chiefly, and the provident way in which the Almighty rewards a long obedience in a cold parish, about 9 years at Marley Cross on a curate's £90, and the damp in the vestry, and the bishop's indifference, and about the living of Wyckham, £900 a year. A rectory with an orchard and 11 bedrooms, the gift of it in the hand of the Duke of Stainforth, old Dr. Pargata dead in it since Advent, and every clergyman in the county circling like rooks over a ploughing. Verity watched the hedges. He is presenting you, she said at last. To Wyckham. He is. Why? Her father laughed. It was a rich laugh. He had a fine instrument and he knew it. And half the county had wept at his Good Friday, because I asked him. You have asked him for 9 years. I have asked him for 9 years, her father agreed, comfortable, and this year I found the thing to say. What thing? Verity, said her father, a man does not go over his own sermons in the trap. She looked at the side of his face, and her father, who could hold 400 people in one hand, would not look at her. It came out at supper, in front of her mother and Susan, in the form of good news. That was the part she thought of afterwards, at night for a long while, not the thing itself, but that it came in with the mutton, and that her mother clapped her hands. His Grace of Stainforth, said the Reverend Edmund Hollis, is going to be married. Susan said. To whom? Susan being 18, and pretty, and having developed in the last 2 years a fine ear for the only question that ever mattered in that house. To your sister. Did he ask for me? Verity said. He is a duke, my love, said her mother. Duke of Stainforth. 20,000 a year, they say, now the new seam is come in. Did he ask for me? The arrangement, said her father, is made. That is not what I asked. Her father laid down his knife and fork, and folded his hands over his plate, and gave her the face he gave the bench, at quarter sessions, patient and grieved, and immovable. Verity, you are 24. You have no fortune, because I have no fortune. You have been offered for twice in your life, by Mr. Sowerby, who is 60 and gouty, and has 4 sons who hate him, and by young Ellis of the bank, who withdrew when he learned what I could give with you, which was nothing. You are a good girl, and a plain one, and a clever one, and I have thanked God for you every day of your life, and I tell you honestly, as your father, and as a priest of the Church of England, that this house cannot keep you. It cannot keep you and bring Susan out. There is not the money. So I am the money, Verity said. You are a duchess, said her mother, in a kind of moan of joy. He is the beast of Stainforth, said Susan suddenly, and then went scarlet and put her hands in her lap. Nobody contradicted her. She knew the story. Everybody within 30 miles knew the story. On the 2nd of February, 1810, at 20 minutes past 6 in the morning, the pit at Stainforth Deep had fired. 31 men and boys were below. 11 came up. 20 did not, and 11 of those 20 were under 17, and 2 were brothers of 9 and 11 who had been trapping doors at the far end of the workings and were never brought up at all. The pit had been sealed on them, and the seal was there yet, with a stone above it bearing the 20 names, a stone the Duke had paid for, and had never, in 9 years, been seen to visit. The pit had had 2 shafts. In the November before the fire, the second shaft, the old upcast, the way out, had been closed on the order of the Duke of Stainforth, 6 months in his dukedom, and 24 years old, to save the cost of keeping it. His signature was on it. It was read out at the inquest and printed in the Haverdale paper, and the paper sold out, and was reprinted and sold out again. Which was the whole horror of it and the reason the story would not die. It was true. The rest was embroidery, that he had been drunk, that he had been in London with a woman while they burned, that his face was the finger of God written on him where it could be read, and Verity, who had been taught by her own father's Lent sermons to hear a congregation swallow, had always privately doubted the embroidery. But the order was true. 20 were dead of it. He had lived, and his face was the record. And in 3 weeks she would be married to him. She blew the candle out and lay in the dark with her eyes open, and what she thought about was not the pit, and not the money, and not Susan's season, and not her father's orchard with 11 bedrooms behind it. What she thought about was that he said, you would wait in the carriage, and that he had been sorry for the dark of all things. In a house where 20 men were dead and his own face was ruined, the man had apologized to her for the dark, and that somewhere in that great shut hall there was a room with 11 covered pictures in it, and a shutter hook standing in a corner off its nail, where somebody had put it down 9 years ago, meaning to come back. They were married on the 11th of February, 1819, at Marley Cross, by the bishop's chaplain, because her father, out of a fortnight in which there was a great deal to choose from, would not do it himself. It would not be seemly, he said, for a man to marry his own daughter. He meant, I will not stand at that altar and be seen to hand her over. And Verity, in the vestry in her mother's made over grey silk, with her hands quite steady, thought, he is ashamed. And then, in the clear cold voice she had lately begun to hear in her own head, and he is doing it anyway, and being ashamed is the cheapest thing he owns. The church was full, people standing at the back who had walked from Haverdale, 3 men with notebooks who were not from Haverdale at all, the county's quality in the boxed pews being seen to be shocked, Lady Bassett among them, in puce with her glass up. The Duke of Stainforth came in at 10 minutes past 11. Alone he walked up that aisle through 400 people, and Verity watched 400 people do the thing all at once, in a ripple, the way a field of barley goes over in wind. They looked away. Then, when he had passed, they looked again at his back, hard with their whole faces, and one woman near the font lifted her child up to see. He wore black, and one black glove on the right hand, and the right side of his face went from the cheekbone down under the line of his cravat. Smooth and drawn and shining in the way skin is when it has been remade, and the eye on that side had a whiteness at the outer edge and did not move quite with the other. He took his place beside her and looked straight ahead at the chaplain. You may look, he said without turning his head, so low that only she heard it. Everyone does. It is quicker if you do it now. I looked in your saloon, Verity said, in January. when you would not come out of the doorway. His head turned 1/4 of an inch and stopped. Yes, he said, you did. And the chaplain said, dearly beloved, and they were married. At the register she saw him take the pen in his left hand, and saw why the right, laid flat to steady the book, would not lie flat, and the glove could not make it. 2 fingers had gone stiff and turned in toward the palm, and the whole of it was a hand that had held on to something for longer than a hand can. She signed under him. Verity Hollis. It was the last time she wrote it. In the porch her father caught her hands and kissed her cheek in front of the county and said, warm and low and glad, God bless you, my dear. You have saved us all. And she said, quite pleasantly, quite clearly, so that afterwards nobody could swear to it and he could never unhear it, did he ask for me, Papa? Her father let go of her hands. The Duke of Stainforth handed her into the carriage himself, on the left side, so that she went up past the unmarked half of him, which she noticed, and filed away, and understood entirely. The horses moved, the county closed over behind them like water. And that was how Verity Hollis came to Stainforth Hall, in a hired chaise, in her mother's grey silk, 9 years and 9 days after the pit fired, sold, as the whole county said before she was out of the churchyard, for £900 a year, and a rectory with an orchard. The hall, at 7 in the evening, was warm. She had expected the January saloon, the cold, the dark, the paper fan in the grate. Instead, the great door opened on a hall with 2 fires going, and lamps up the stair, and every servant in the house standing in a line to see their duchess. Mrs. Tarrant curtsied. Your Grace. Mrs. Tarrant, said Verity, you owe me a candle. There was a silence of the kind that comes before a house decides what it thinks of you. Then Mrs. Tarrant's grey face did something complicated at the corners, and one of the footmen made a noise and turned it into a cough, and the housekeeper said, I do, Your Grace. I've never been sorrier for anything in 9 years. Then we shall say no more about it. In her own rooms, where a girl called Anne was unpacking her trunk, lifting out the 8-year-old gowns, and the darned stockings, and the one good bonnet with such perfect flat calm that Verity understood the whole household had been told, in advance and in detail, exactly what to be blind to. The shutters were folded and barred across too. The bar had been painted over. The paint here was pale blue. The Duke sent word at 9 that he would be in the library if her Grace wished to speak with him tonight, and would not take it amiss if she did not. And Verity, who had been married 11 hours and had eaten nothing since Marley Cross, went down. He was standing. He had put the lamp on the far table, on his left, and he had put a chair for her where the light would fall on her and not on him, and he was standing behind his own chair with his ruined hand out of sight. And Verity, coming in, thought, he has staged this room like a play, and he has been staging it since 1 o'clock, and he has been dreading it more than I have. Sit down, Your Grace, she said. I shall not be able to do this if you stand. He sat. There are things to be said, he said, and I would rather say them tonight than let you learn them by degrees. This is not a marriage. It is a contract, and you have not read it, which is not right, so I am going to read it to you. He put his left hand flat on the table. You have £4,000 a year settled, in your own name, from tonight. Not pin money, settled. It is yours if I die, it is yours if you leave me, and it is yours if you go to Italy tomorrow morning and never write. Mr. Pike has the papers. You will sign nothing until your own man of business has read them, and if you have not got a man of business, you will have one by Friday, and I will not pay him. And you? Said Verity. I keep the east wing and the library and the estate. I do not dine in company. I go out at first light, and I am generally back by dark. You will not be troubled with me. That is not what I asked. He stopped. I asked what you are, said Verity, not where you keep yourself. She folded her hands in her lap, because they wanted to shake, and she had decided a long time ago, at about the age of 11, that her hands were not going to be allowed a vote. Your Grace, I am going to ask you one question tonight, and then I shall let you alone. My father has told me a great deal about this marriage, and I have not believed a word of it since the mutton. So I shall ask you. And you may lie to me if you like, but I shall know. Ask. Do you want a wife, said Verity, or do you want to be left alone? I can do either. I have had a great deal of practice at both. But I should like to know which I am for. That is not a question I have an answer to, he said at last. That is an answer, is it? It is the first true thing anybody has said to me since Christmas, said Verity. Yes, it will do very well. He looked at her, and for 1 second, the length of one breath, he turned his head. Not far, perhaps 10 degrees. Enough that the lamplight went across the ruined side of him, the drawn shine of it, the small ear, the white at the edge of the eye, and he watched her while it did. Verity looked back. She did not do anything with her face. That took everything she had, but she had a great deal, and she spent all of it at once and did not regret it afterwards. He turned away again. There are keys, he said, and his voice had gone rustier. He took a ring off the table, a serious ring, 40 keys or more, the whole body of a great house, and put it in front of her. Mrs. Tarrant will teach you the house. There is nothing in it you may not have. Thank you. One thing. He did not look up. At the end of the long gallery, on the east, there is a door. It is not locked. It has never been locked. You may satisfy yourself of that tonight if you wish. He was speaking now very carefully, the way a man walks who is carrying something full. I would rather you did not open it. Not because you may not. Because if you open it, you will not be able to close it again. I do not mean that as a threat. I mean that a thing once seen is seen. So I ask this, if you mean to open it, tell me first. I will not stop you. I would only rather not learn of it afterwards. Verity put her hand on the keys. Is there a person behind that door? She said. Yes, said the Duke of Stainforth. And that was the whole of it. And he did not say another word about it, but rose and bowed, and wished her good night, and was gone. And Verity sat alone in the library of a house she now owned, with 40 keys in her lap and £4,000 a year, and a husband who had told her the truth twice in one evening, and thought, with a clarity that frightened her more than the door did, whatever is behind it, he did not lie to me about it, and my father has lied to me about everything. She was 3 days learning the house, and by the end of the second she had stopped being frightened and started being angry, which was a great relief, because anger she could work with. It went like this. Her chair at breakfast was on the side of the room away from the door, out of the draught. She had not asked for it. On the first morning it had been by the door, and she had sat in it and said nothing, and on the second morning it was moved. There were books in her morning room on the third day, Cowper, and a Mansfield Park with the leaves uncut, and this was the one that undid her, a Culpeper's herbal, because she had said once, in passing, to Mrs. Tarrant, that she had kept the still room at Marley Cross and rather missed the mixing of things. Her window sash, which had rattled the first night, did not rattle on the second. The fire in the little east room, which she had gone into once for 10 minutes to look at the rain, was lit every day thereafter at 11, in case she went again. Nobody told her any of this was happening. Nobody ever said his name in connection with it. The house simply arranged itself around her, silently, in the night like water finding a level, and on the third day Verity Hollis, who had spent 24 years in a house where she was the one who noticed things and nobody had ever once noticed her, went upstairs at 4 p.m. and shut her door and cried for 11 minutes with a towel pressed over her mouth, out of pure rage, because she had had to be sold to a monster to find out what it was like to be paid attention to. Then she washed her face and went and found Mrs. Tarrant and said, "I want the shutter hook." Mrs. Tarrant's hands stopped. "Which one, Your Grace?" "All of them. Every hook in the house. I want the south front open. Your Grace, I have been 3 days in this house and I have not yet seen it," said Verity. "I do not know what color the drawing room is. I have a husband who tells me the truth and a father who does not, and I have £4,000 a year and 40 keys, and I cannot find out what color the drawing room is." She heard her own voice go, and steadied it. "Why are they shut?" And Mrs. Tarrant, who had been housekeeper at Stainforth for 22 years, put down the linen she was holding and told her. They had shut them in the June after the fire. Not because of the fire, because of the people. They came from Haverdale on the coach, at first 3 and 4 a day, and then in the summer 30. They walked up the avenue as though it were a public road, and stood on the gravel with their faces to the windows, and waited, sometimes for hours, in the hope of it. Families came with their dinners. A man from the town brought a spy-glass and let it out at a penny a look. And there was a fellow, Mrs. Tarrant's voice did not change at all when she said this, which was how Verity knew what it cost her. There was a fellow who stood at the park gate a whole August, charging 6pence to be shown which window was his, and who had a card printed. And the card said the Beast of Stainforth, and they sold above 200 of them. So they had shut the south front, ground floor first, then the first floor. Then the Duke stopped using any room that faced the park. Then he stopped coming down in the day at all, and then by the autumn they had painted the bars, because a bar that is painted cannot rattle, and because, Mrs. Tarrant said, looking at the linen, if they're painted, Your Grace, then nobody has to decide, of a morning, whether to open them. It's decided. It's a mercy, in its way. There's a deal of things in this house that were made into paint, so nobody would have to decide of a morning. Verity stood very still. How many come now? 2 or 3 in a month, Your Grace. Fewer in winter. It's an old show now. Was there anyone today? There's generally someone of a Sunday. Fetch me the hook, said Verity. It took 4 of them and the better part of an hour, and they did it in her own morning room. Because she would not have them do the drawing room first, she had worked out by then that this was going to have to be done the way you go into cold water. 1 step you can stand, and then another. The paint cracked all round the bar with a sound like a small dry animal being broken, and the bar came up under the hook, and the shutter swung, and the second one swung, and the light came in. It came in like something falling. It was 4 in the afternoon, in the middle of February. There was no sun. It was the ordinary flat grey light of a wet English winter. The light she had lived in her whole life and thought nothing of, and it came into that room and went over 9 years of grey dust fur on a green silk wall, and a lemon-yellow ceiling with plaster fruit on it, and a carpet whose roses were still red, and the room was so beautiful that Anne sat down on the floor. Nobody spoke. Then Verity went to the glass and put her hands on the sash and looked out, for the first time, at what the house had been hiding from. The park went down 200 yards to a ha-ha and then to the beeches. There was a wet lawn and a cedar and rooks. There was nothing else. There was nothing there at all. And then there was, at the edge of the trees, where the drive came in, a man standing with his hat in his hands, looking up at the house. He had seen the shutter open. He had come 3 steps out of the trees to see better. He was quite an ordinary man in a brown coat, perhaps 40, perhaps a shopkeeper. He had walked out from Haverdale on a wet Wednesday in February and stood in the trees for the chance of it, and when the shutter opened and a woman's shape came into the black square of it, he did not run away. He put his hat on his head and stood up straight and waited, patiently, in the rain, in case the beast should come to the window. Verity looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the second window herself. She did it slowly, and she did it standing where he could see her do it, and when both were folded back she stood in the middle of the light with her hands at her sides, and looked steadily down the lawn at the man in the brown coat, until he understood that he had been seen. And she went on looking at him while he took his hat off again, and turned it round twice in his hands, and went back into the trees. That night at dinner the Duke of Stainforth did not come. But in the morning, when she came down, the shutters of her morning room were still open. Nobody had touched them in the night, and on the table under the window, where the light fell on it, somebody had left the second shutter hook. Not a note. Not a word. 6 feet of black iron, with the brass eye at the shaft, and beside it, on the wood, a smear of pale blue paint, where it had been used on something already. She went along the whole south front that day, with Anne and 2 footmen and a chisel. 19 windows. It took until dusk, and when she was done, she stood on the wet gravel in the dark and looked back at Stainforth Hall with every window on the south front open and every room behind them lit, and it stood there in the middle of its black park blazing like a ship at sea, and 11 miles away, in a rectory with an orchard and 11 bedrooms, her father was writing to the bishop. He came down at 8 the next morning, which he had not done, Mrs. Tarrant said, in 4 years. Verity was in the drawing-room with her back to the door, looking at the colour of it. It was blue. The drawing-room at Stainforth Hall was a pale, singing blue with white plaster swags, and she had been standing in it 20 minutes like a woman in a church, and she heard him stop in the doorway behind her, and did not turn round, because she had begun to understand that turning round was the thing that cost him. "You have opened the whole front," he said. "I have. There were 19. They will come. When it is known. They will stand on the gravel." "Yes," said Verity. "I expect they will." "A man stood in the rain on Wednesday 2 hours in the hope of your face, and went away with nothing, because there was a woman in the window instead. If he comes back on Sunday, there will be a woman in the window again, and again the Sunday after that, and by Easter he will have a wet coat and no story to tell in Haverdale. They do not want you, your grace. They want the beast. If the house is lit, and there is a duchess in it doing her needlework at the window, there is no beast, and there is no sixpence in it, and they will go and look at something else. She turned round then. He was standing in the doorway in the full pale flood of the morning, both sides of him in it, nowhere to put his face, and he had come in anyway, and he was looking not at her but past her at the blue walls and the white swags and the light going up onto the ceiling, with the expression of a man reading a letter from somebody long dead. "My mother chose that blue," he said. "It is very fine." "Yes," his jaw moved. "It is." He did not come further in, but he did not go, either, for perhaps half a minute. Then he said, "There will be talk," and Verity said, "There has been talk for 9 years. Your Grace, it is not a new expense." And something happened at the left corner of his mouth that was not a smile, but was certainly its ancestor. The sound came on the 9th night, a man's voice, out of the east end of the house, a long way off through a great deal of stone, screaming. It was not a word. It went on perhaps 6 seconds, and stopped as though a hand had been put over it. Verity was at her door with her wrapper round her before she had decided anything at all. The passage was black, and then it was not. At the far end, where the long gallery began, a lamp was coming, carried and moving fast, and she stood in her own doorway with her candle unlit, and watched the Duke of Stainforth go past the end of the passage at a dead run. He did not see her. He was in his shirt. He had no glove on. It came again 4 nights later, and on the Sunday, and then twice in a week, and in the daytime nobody in that house so much as looked at her sideways about it. Mrs. Tarrant said, "That's his to tell, your Grace, not mine, and you'd not thank me for it, nor him neither." She did not ask him. She was never afterwards able to explain to anybody why, except that he had said, "If you mean to open it, tell me first," and that a person who is given a rule like that is being handed something, and she had been handed very few things in her life, and did not mean to break this one by picking at it in the dark. So she went at the county instead. The card came on the last day of February. Lady Bassett, at home. Thursday, the first card that had come into Stainforth Hall in 9 years, and it had come plainly because 19 shutters had been opened, and the whole north of the county wanted to see the woman who had been sold to the beast for a living. Verity did not go on the Thursday. She went instead on the Tuesday, in the Duke's own carriage, with the Duke's arms on the door, to Fellgate. Fellgate was the pit village, a mile and a half of black road, a beck, a chapel, and the Row. And Verity had expected, she was ashamed of it afterwards, and remembered it deliberately for years, the way you keep a bad drawing to remind you what your hand used to do. She had expected the Row to be a horror. Her father had preached about Fellgate for 9 years. The widows of Fellgate. It was practically a line of scripture in that house. She had heard it in Advent and in Lent, and at every dinner at which there was anybody present who might subscribe. The Row was 2 lines of new brick cottages in pairs, with slate roofs and a strip of garden apiece. There was a pump that worked. There was a school at the end with 40 children in it, and a coal fire going, and at the top of the street, where the old Row had stood, there was a stone with 20 names on it, and somebody had put snowdrops on the step of it, in a jam jar that morning. She stood in front of the stone a long time. "Who keeps the school?" she said. "The fund, your grace," said Mrs. Tarrant. "My father's fund." "The fund, your grace," said Mrs. Tarrant. They took her in, at the third cottage down, because the woman there, Hannah Toole, 50, with hands like a man's, came out to the gate to look at the carriage, and then said, flatly, "You'd best come in, afore you're wet," which was, Verity later understood, the single greatest social risk anybody took on her behalf in the whole of that year. There were 6 of them in that kitchen, inside 20 minutes. They gave her tea in a cup that had been kept for company since before the fire, and they looked at her, the Duchess of Stainforth, in her mother's made-over grey silk, on a settle in a pit cottage, with a frank, exhausted, unsentimental attention she had never had from anybody of her own rank in her life. She had come to ask them what they needed. She got about 9 minutes into that before she understood that they did not need anything, which stopped her like a wall. The rents at Fellgate were £1 a week and had not been raised in 9 years. Every widow of the 20 had £18 a year for life, paid quarterly at the Haverdale Bank in her own name, whether she married again or not, and that's the queer part, said Hannah Toll. Whether we wed again or not. There's them as told us that were a mistake in the writing. It weren't a mistake. Every child had his schooling to 14 and his apprentice fee after, boy or girl, and there were 2 of them at Durham now, learning the law and the drawing. The fund, said Verity carefully, does a great deal. There was a silence in that kitchen. It was not a hostile silence. It was worse. It was the silence of 6 women deciding, all at once and without consulting each other, that the young lady was not going to be told, because she was the parson's daughter, and it was not their business, and there was no profit in it, and she had been sold to the man already, poor soul, and what good would it do her now? Verity Hollis had spent 24 years in a house where things were decided about her in rooms she was not in. She could hear it happening. "Mrs. Toole," she said. "You have not once in an hour said my husband's name." Hannah Toole put her cup down. "No, the county says he killed your husband." "The county," said Hannah Toole, once hanging. "But the order is real. He signed it. The second shaft was closed on his order, and your husband had 1 way out instead of 2. "Aye," said Hannah Toll. "He signed it. Then why does nobody in this village hate him?" And Hannah Toll looked at her for a long moment, with the face of a woman standing at the edge of a very deep hole, with a lamp in her hand, deciding whether to give it away. "We don't say that here," she said. "That's all. It's not a thing we say in Fellgate." "Why not?" "Because we've seen him," said Hannah Toole. She came into the hall at 6:30 and gave her cloak to a footman, and Mr. Pike came out of the estate room and bowed and said, "Your Grace, a letter from Wyckham. The rector calls tomorrow." And Verity said, "Thank you, Mr. Pike," and went up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs she turned right instead of left, and went down the whole length of the long gallery in the dark, past 9 generations of Vaughans on the walls, to the door at the east end. It was oak. It had a plain iron handle, worn bright. She put her hand on it, and it turned. He had told her the truth. It was not locked. It had never been locked. 9 years. And the door at the end of the gallery that the whole county called the Beast's Den had stood there on a latch, all day, every day, waiting for somebody in the house to want to know badly enough to ask. Verity took her hand off the handle. Then she went and found her husband in the library and said, "Your Grace." I am going to open the door at the end of the gallery. You told me to tell you first. I am telling you first." He was a long time answering. He had been writing when she came in, and he did not put the pen down. He sat with it in his left hand over the paper, not writing, and Verity stood in the middle of his library and let him have as long as he wanted, because she had learned by then that he was a man who did all his living in the pause before he spoke. "Now?" he said at last. "Now why tonight?" "Because I went to Fellgate today," said Verity, "and I did a sum in the carriage coming home, and the sum was wrong, and because I have been listening to a man scream in this house at 3 a.m. for a fortnight, and saying nothing about it at breakfast, and I find I have got to the end of what I can pretend not to know. I am not asking you to tell me. You said if I meant to open it, I was to tell you first. I mean to open it. I am telling you first." He stood up. "Then I shall take the lamp," said the Duke of Stainforth, "because the stair is bad." They went the length of the long gallery together in the dark, with one lamp between them, and neither of them said anything, and Verity, who had thought she was frightened, discovered as they went that she was not. What she was something much stranger and much worse. She was grieved, in advance, for whatever was going to be true in about 90 seconds, and she did not know yet whether she was grieved for him or for herself. At the door he put his hand on the iron handle and did not turn it. "There are 11 men behind this door," he said. "They have been there 9 years. Their names are Naylor, Toole, Ockley, Ridley, Fenwick, Hale, Soden, Craggs, Buick, Armstrong, and Dodd. They are not a secret. A secret is a thing you are hiding. They are a household, and they are mine, and I would have told the whole county 9 years ago, and the county would not have it, because if there are 11 of them alive up here, then the beast has done something, and there is no profit to anybody in that." He was not looking at her. "You will want to know why I asked you not to open it." "Yes, because when they hear a woman's step out there, they think their wife has come. And when it is not, that is a thing I have watched 11 men's faces do, and I would not have you do it to them for curiosity." "I have not come out of curiosity," said Verity. "No," he said, "I do not believe you have." And he opened the door. It was warm. That was the first thing, and it undid her entirely, because she had spent a fortnight furnishing that room in her head, out of her father's Lent sermons, and the card that said the Beast of Stainforth, and what came out of it was warmth, and lamp oil, and tobacco, and tar, and a fiddle being played badly, and, under all of it, a smell she knew perfectly well, having kept a still room for 9 years. Tincture of myrrh and hog's lard, which is what you dress an old burn with, when the burn has been old a very long time and will never be anything else. It was a long room, the old East Gallery, 110 feet of it, and it had a fire at each end, and it was lit like a fair. There was a long table down the middle, with a game of cards on it. There were beds along one wall, 11 of them, made, with the counterpanes turned back. There were chairs by the near fire, and in the chairs there were men, and every man in that room turned round and looked at the door. Nobody screamed, nobody hid, nobody did anything at all except go quiet, all together, like a school when the master comes in. She made herself look. She had promised herself coming down the gallery that whatever was in there she would look at it for a whole 3 seconds before she did anything with her face. And she did. She stood in the door of that room and looked at 11 men who had been in a coal fire, and counted in 3 seconds 2 who had no faces to speak of, only the shape where faces are kept, 1 who had no hands at all, and a fiddle bow strapped to his forearm with a leather cuff, 1 breathing in a way that filled the whole room, slowly at the top of his chest, like a bellows with a hole in it, 1 very old one with a beard on one side, and 1 young one, 26 or 7, with a good half face and a bad half face, who was standing up out of his chair with his mouth open, staring at her, because she had come in with a woman's step, and he had thought his mother had come. "Sit down, Jem," said the Duke of Stainforth quite gently. "It is not Sunday." The young man sat down. "Gentlemen," said the Duke, "this is my wife." And the very old one with half a beard, who was, though she did not know it yet, Bartholomew Naylor, 68, 31 years a hewer at Stainforth Deep, brought up the shaft on the Duke's back on the 3rd trip, who had lost both hands to the rope on the way. Bart Naylor got up out of his chair with his 2 wrapped stumps held in front of him, and made her a bow that would not have disgraced St. James's, and said, in the broadest Durham she had ever heard in her life, "Your Grace." "We've heard a deal about you." "Have you?" said Verity. "Aye," said Bart Naylor. "You opened the shutters." And Verity Hollis, Duchess of Stainforth, stood in the door of the room the whole county called the Beast's Den, and discovered that she was crying, and that the 11 men in it were all being very polite about it, and that her husband beside her was standing quite still with the lamp in his ruined hand, looking at the floor, and had not once, in the whole of that room and the whole of that light, thought to hide his face. She was there until 2 in the morning. She had gone in meaning to look, and she came out having been beaten at cribbage by a man with no hands, who played by having Jem Tull hold his cards, and by never once being wrong about what was in anybody else's, and having heard about Ockley. Ockley did not speak. He had not spoken since the 2nd of February 1810. He sat by the far fire with his back to the room, and his hands on his knees, and his wife came up from Fellgate every Sunday, and sat with him 2 hours, and told him what the children had done in the week, and he did not speak to her either, and she came anyway, every Sunday, for 9 years. He was at the far end, said Bart Naylor. Why, the Barlow lads. Him and the 2 Barlow lads together, at the doors. His Grace got him. Couldn't get them. There's nowt to say to a man about that. So he doesn't say it. Mr. Wick came at 11, a small, dry, 60-year-old surgeon with a Newcastle voice, who had been the pit's own surgeon and was now resident in the east gallery of a ducal house and entirely unimpressed by it, and shook her hand and said, "You'll be wanting the day-book." The day-book was 9 years of what a burned man's night is. She read 4 pages of it at the long table at midnight, and then put her hand flat on it and stopped, because she had found the entry for the 4th of March, 1810, in a different hand, a young man's writing, before the ink got old. Ockley very bad again. Sat with him. He will not have Wick. He will have me because I was there. That's his Grace's hand, said Mr. Wick over her shoulder. First 8 month. That book's mostly his. 19 come up alive, your Grace. 8 died in this room. Some quick. Not all quick, he was at every one. 40 year I've been at this, and I never saw a man sit through what he sat through. And the last was a lad of 13 name of Barlow. And after that he did not come down out of this wing for 9 months. And after that he did not open his shutters. Wick took the book back and put it under his arm, and he was not a sentimental man, and his voice did not change at all. So when the county tells you what he is, you may tell them Wick says they're welcome to come up and take a turn at the night watch. They can start Tuesday. They walked back down the long gallery at 2 a.m. with the one lamp. 9 years, Verity said. Your Grace, 9 years, in that room, and the county thinks you keep a menagerie. The county thinks what is convenient. That is not a complaint. It is the arrangement. He was walking on her right, she noticed. He had done it without a word when they came out, putting his ruined side away from her in the dark out of 9 years of habit, and she thought, with a violence that surprised her, I shall break you of that if it takes me 40 years. The screaming, she said. Ockley, or Hale, mostly Ockley. You go to them. I was there, said the Duke of Stainforth, as though that ended it. And it was not until a long while afterwards, lying awake in a duchess's bed, with her heart going like a hammer, that Verity understood he had said the same 4 words as the daybook, in the same voice, 9 years apart, and that they were not an explanation at all. They were his whole religion. I was there. He had been in the dark with them. He was in the dark with them still, and it had not once occurred to him, in 9 years, that he was allowed to come up. She got the rest of it out of Bart Naylor in the 3rd week of March, on a wet Tuesday, over cribbage, because Bart Naylor was 68 years old and had no hands, and had therefore lost some time ago all patience with the ordinary discretions. You'll have done your sum then, he said, which is to say he watched Jem Tull deal, and told him when he was wrong. My sum? Fellgate, £18 a year to 20 widows. The row, the schooling, the prentice fees. 2 lads at Durham. Bart Naylor looked at her with his one good eye. You've been to Fellgate, and come back, and gone quiet. You'll have done your sum. Verity put her cards down. It is £900 a year, she said, at the least. I have done it 4 times. It is nearer 1100, with the school. Aye. The Marley Crosspit Widows' Fund has 109 subscribers. I know, because my father reads their names from the pulpit in Lent, and has done since I was 15, and I could recite them to you now. Lady Bassett gives 5 guineas. The bank at Haverdale gives 10. There are 61 names on that list that give half a crown. The whole of that list, Mr. Naylor in the best year it ever had, came to £140. £141, 6 shilling, said Bart Naylor. Year afore last. It were read out. Then where does the rest of it come from? And Bart Naylor said, Where do you think, lass? Nobody had called her lass since she was 9 years old. She sat in a chair in the east gallery of Stainforth Hall, with a game of cribbage in front of her, and 11 burned men pretending very hard to be busy at the other end of the room, and heard the whole thing land at once, the way you hear a slate come off a roof. There's a line in that book down at Marley Cross, said Bart Naylor. Every quarter day, 9 year, £240, and it's put in as a subscriber. Not a name, just that. A subscriber. Your father reads it out same as the rest, and from a subscriber who wishes to remain unknown, £240, and then he goes on to Lady Bassett's 5 guineas, and everybody in that church says what a good man the parson is. He knows, said Verity. Of course he knows, said Bart Naylor. Who else has £240 a quarter in this county? He's known 9 year. First 2 year his grace tried to send it open. Why his name to it? Your father sent it back. He sent it back. Twice wrote a very fine letter, they say. The fund cannot be seen to take the money of the man who—" Bart Naylor stopped himself, and his mouth went thin, and he finished it anyway, because he had no hands and no patience and nothing left to lose. The man who did it. And then, come the third quarter, he wrote again and said the fund would take it. Quiet. We no name on it. And it's been a subscriber ever since. Verity said, very steadily, "Say the rest, Mist. Naylor, the rest is you," said Bart Naylor. "Beg pardon, your grace, but you will have worked that and all." She went down to the library that night at 11 and shut the door behind her and stood with her back against it. "Did you ask for me?" she said. The Duke of Stainforth looked at her for a long moment. Then he got up and moved the lamp to the far table, on his left, the way he always did, and then, and she never forgot this, he stopped and looked at the lamp where he had put it, and picked it up again, and put it back in the middle of the table between them, where it lit both halves of his face and hers. "No," he said, "I did not. Tell me." "Your father has come to this house every year for 9 years, said the Duke. "In January. He has always wanted Wyckham. Old Pargeter was a long time dying, and your father was very patient, and every year I have told him no, and every year he has gone away and preached about me in Lent, and that was the arrangement, and I did not mind it particularly. A man may have my living or he may have my character, and he could not have both. And he chose, and it was an honest choice for a dishonest man." He paused. "This January he brought his daughter. He left me in the saloon. He left you in the saloon. And he sat where you are standing, and he said, 'The living of Wyckham, your grace, and my daughter with it.'" His voice did not change. I said no. And he said that his daughter was 24, and plain and portionless, and would go to Sowerby, who is 60, and who buried the last one in 11 months. I said that was not my affair, and that he might take you home, and I rang for Mrs. Tarrant to have your carriage brought round. The Duke's left hand lay flat on the table, and your father said, "My daughter has been in this house an hour, your grace, alone in the beast's house, and I need only mention it in Haverdale." Verity stood very still. "He would not have done it," she said. "It would have ruined him. It would have ruined you," said the Duke, "and cost him nothing but you, and he knew, and I knew, which of those two things the county would spend its afternoon on. He had thought about it a great deal. It was not a wild throw. He had brought you in the carriage on purpose, and he had left you in a cold room on purpose, so that Mrs. Tarrant would have to be sent for and there would be witnesses to how long you were in it. He is not a fool. He is the cleverest man I have ever done business with, and I have done business with brewers. So you married me. I gave him the living and I married you, said the Duke of Stainforth, and I have known every day since that you were put in this house by a man threatening to say my name near yours, which is a thing I could not stop. Because my name is the one thing about me that cannot be mended. I did not ask for you. I bought your father off with a rectory, and I took his price, because his price was the only thing standing between you and a story that would have followed you into the ground. You have 4,000 a year, and this house, and the keys of it, and you may go to Italy tomorrow. That is not generosity, madam, that is restitution. I have known what you were owed since the 11th of February, and I have not known how to say it, and I have been very grateful this last month that you were too well bred to ask. I am not well bred, said Verity. I am the daughter of a curate who sold me. I have simply been waiting until I could bear the answer." Neither of them said anything for a while. The fire went on. "Naylor told you about the money," he said. "Yes, he should not have." "He has no hands, Your Grace. He has stopped taking instruction." She came away from the door then and crossed the room and sat down opposite him in the chair he had put on the wrong side, and folded her own hands on the table and looked at him, the whole of him, both sides, in a lamp that was in the middle of the table where he had put it himself. Now, the order. His face closed like a shutter. "Naylor told you that too. Naylor told me that Mr. Vosper sold the timber out of the second shaft 2 years before you ever came into the title, and that when the shaft was closed on your order it had already been robbed and was not there to be closed, and that Mr. Wick has the papers of it in a box in his room, and that the 11 men in your East Gallery have asked you, every one of them, more than once, and I gather with a good deal of language, to let it be published, and that you will not." "No, why?" "Because I signed it," said the Duke of Stainforth. "You were 24. I was 24, and it was the 10th of November, and my father had been in the ground 3 months, and Vosper put 40 papers in front of me in one afternoon, and I signed the lot between a funeral and a dinner, and I did not read one of them. Not one." He was not raising his voice. That was the terrible part. He had plainly said this to himself so many thousand times that it had gone smooth, like the burn. "That is the whole of my defense, madam, and you may hear how it sounds. I did not read it. 20 men and boys are in the ground under a stone with their names on it, because a young man could not be troubled to read what he put his hand to. If I let Wick publish, the county will say Vosper did it, and Vosper is dead, and his widow is at Barnard Castle on my money with 4 children, and the name of a dead thief will take the whole weight of it, and I shall be pitied. I shall be pitied, madam, by the same people who sell cards of me at the park gate. And then it will be over, and I shall have got out of it, and there will be nothing left in the world that says 20 men are dead of me, except a stone that nobody visits." Verity said, "Do you go to it?" "The stone? No." "Why not?" "Because I have no right to be seen there," said the Duke of Stainforth. "It is the only thing in this county the widows have got that is theirs. If I come to it, it becomes a thing about me. Everything becomes a thing about me. That is what my face is for." And Verity Hollis, who had grown up in a house where every good deed was done at a volume calculated to carry to the back pew, and who had listened to her father read out and from a subscriber, who wishes to remain unknown for 9 years in the voice of a man handing round his own alms, Verity looked across a lamp at a man who had spent 9 years constructing, with enormous care and at ruinous cost, a monster to stand in front of a mistake, so that nobody would ever be tempted to forgive him for it. "I am not going to tell you that you are innocent," she said. His head came up. "I have thought about it for 3 weeks, and I am not going to do it," said Verity. "It is not mine to say, and you would not believe me, and it would spoil everything between us in a week. You signed it. You did not read it. 20 men are dead. That is yours, Your Grace. You have carried it for 9 years, and I am not going to insult you by trying to take it off you in a warm room at midnight, because if I could take it off you in a warm room at midnight, it would not have been worth carrying. She stood up. "But I am going to open the shutters," she said. "Madam, you have not got a choice about it. You have made yourself into a thing that has to be kept in the dark, and it is very fine, and it is very cheap, and I have been sold to it. So you may sit in your library and be the Beast of Stainforth if you like, and I shall be in the East Gallery on Tuesday, reading the newspaper to 11 men who are extremely rude about my cribbage, and the door will be open, and you may do as you please about it." She got to the door. "Verity," he said. It was the first time. She stopped with her hand on the handle and did not turn round, because she could hear quite clearly that he had not meant to, and that turning round would cost him more than it was worth. "Nothing," he said. "Good night." She read to them on the Tuesday. It began with the Haverdale paper, because Jem Tull wanted the shipping and Bart Naylor wanted the assizes, and halfway through she came, without warning, to a paragraph on the 3rd page about the Duchess of S., lately married out of a curacy, who was said to have opened the great house on the North Road to the light of day at last, and about which the paper's correspondent permitted himself some pleasantries. Verity read it out, the whole of it, in her ordinary voice. There was a silence of about 4 seconds, and then Bart Naylor laughed until Mr. Wick had to come and thump him, and after that the East Gallery of Stainforth Hall was hers for life. On the 4th night, she became aware of her husband. He was in the corridor. He did not come in. The door stood open, as it had stood open since the first night, and he was out there in the dark of the gallery with his back to the wall beside the doorframe, in the exact place where a man may hear everything in a room and be seen by nobody in it, and she knew. Because Jem Tull's eye went to the door and then, very carefully, away. He was there the next night. And the next. For 11 nights the Duke of Stainforth stood in a cold corridor outside his own East Gallery and listened to his wife read a novel to 11 men he had carried up a ladder. On the 12th night Verity came in early and moved a chair. She did not make anything of it. She put it just inside the door, in the shadow, facing the wrong way, the way a chair stands when it has been left there by accident, and then sat down in her own chair and opened her book, and did not once, all evening, look at the door. She read for 40 minutes. And somewhere in the middle of it, without any noise at all, the room changed, the way a room does when a fire is lit in it, or when weather comes, and she did not look up, and she did not stop reading, and Jem Tull's face did the most extraordinary thing over the top of his cards, and Bart Naylor said, "I," very quietly, to nobody, in the voice of an old man watching a very long horse race come in. The Duke of Stainforth had come in and sat down in the chair by the door. He said nothing. He stayed 40 minutes. He went before the end, and he did not speak to her, and he did not look at anybody, and the next night he came at 7, and sat in the same chair and stayed to the end of the chapter. By the middle of April he had a place at the long table with a hand of cards in it, and Ridley was calling him "Your Grace," in a tone that had in it unmistakably an old man's contempt for a young man's card play, and Verity Hollis sat at the other end of 110 feet of warm room and read out loud, and did not let herself look at him, and was so happy that she frightened herself. Lady Bassett called in October without a card at 4 in the afternoon, which is what you do when you have decided in advance that you are not calling on a house but inspecting one, and brought Lady Celia Bourne with her, who was 36 and beautiful, and who had been betrothed to Tobias Vaughan in the winter of 1809, and who had broken it 4 months after the fire by letter from Bath. Verity received them in the blue drawing-room with all 19 shutters open. They had tea. Lady Celia said twice how brave Verity was. Lady Bassett talked for 11 minutes about the fund, and the annual dinner at Haverdale on the 2nd of February, and how the whole county came, and how the committee had at last resolved to mark 9 years of the rector of Wyckham's labours with a piece of plate, a salver, engraved, and it was to be a surprise, and of course her Grace would come. Would she not? And sit on the platform beside her father? I should not miss it, said Verity. He offered her her freedom in November. The dower house at Corton, he said. It is a good house. 11 miles, you would see the men when you chose, the 4,000 stands, and there is a further 2,000 settled in this. You would be a duchess living apart, which is a thing the world understands perfectly well and does not punish. Nobody would ever ask you for anything again. Verity looked at the papers. Why now? She said. Because Lady Bassett came, said the Duke of Stainforth, and I watched you be looked at, in my own drawing-room, by a woman who came to see how much you had been damaged, and because you have been 11 months in this house and you have made it, he stopped, his jaw moved. You have made it a place people can be in. And I find I have got used to it, madam, and a man who has got used to a thing is exactly the man who ought not to be trusted about it. You did not choose this. Your father chose it, and I let him, and I have been living on that ever since. And I have discovered that I am not able to go on doing it. Have you asked me? Said Verity. I am asking you. No, said Verity. You are offering. That is a different thing entirely. You have been offering me things since February, money and keys and a house, and now a door out of it. You have never once asked me for anything. Not one thing, in 11 months. Do you know that? I have counted. She stood up. So ask. Madam, ask me to stay, said Verity. Say the words. You have made me the richest woman in this county, and I have not yet been asked for so much as the salt. And I find, your Grace, that I have got to the end of what I can bear of your good manners. The room was very quiet. Stay, he said. Louder. Stay, said Tobias Vaughan. Verity picked up the papers, the deed of the dower house at Cotton, and the settlement of £2,000, and the whole of her honourable, comfortable, 11-mile escape, and put them in the fire, and watched them until they were nothing. I have opened 19 shutters in this house, she said. I am not going anywhere until I have finished the front. And she turned round, and he was standing directly in the middle of the lamplight, with both sides of his face in it, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at weather he has been praying for. The Fund's annual dinner was held at the Assembly Rooms at Haverdale on the 2nd of February, 1820, which was the 10th anniversary of the fire, as it had been every year, and 240 people came, which was more than had ever come, and everybody in that room knew perfectly well why. They had come to see whether the Duchess of Stainforth would bring the beast. She did. They came in at 8, and he was on her left, in black, with the black glove, and she had her hand on his arm, and the room went through the whole business in one long ripple, the look away, the second look. And Verity walked her husband the length of the Assembly Rooms at Haverdale, through 240 people, at the pace she would have used in her own garden, and did not hurry once, and put him in the chair beside hers on the platform, and sat down. Her father spoke for 40 minutes. He was, and it must be said, magnificent. He had the whole room. He had the widows of Fellgate in the third row in their black, and he had the bank and the brewery and Lady Bassett in puce and Lady Celia Bourne beside her, and he built it beautifully, as he always did. And at the 35th minute he came to the reading of the subscription, as he had come to it every year since 1811. He read the 109 names. He read Lady Bassett's 5 guineas, and the bank's 10, and the 61 half-crowns of the poor of Marley Cross, and the room made the noise a room makes. And then he said, in the voice he kept for it, warm, and lowered, and full of a lovely rueful wonder, and from a subscriber, who wishes to remain unknown. £240. He let it sit. He always let it sit. Papa, said Verity, from the platform, quite clearly, who is the subscriber? The rector of Wyckham turned round. 240 people went absolutely silent, in the way that only a room full of people who have paid for their dinner can. My dear, he said, smiling, he wishes to remain unknown. Yes, said Verity. She stood up. But you know his name. Verity, £240 a quarter, for 9 years and 3 quarters, said Verity. £9,360. The rest of the list, in the same time, has given 1,140. I have the book here, Papa. It is the fund's own book. It was on the table. Anybody in this room may come up and look at it. She had it open in her 2 hands. Every widow of the 20 has £18 a year for life, whether she marries again or not. Every child has his schooling to 14, and his apprentice fee after. There is a school at Fellgate with a master in it, and coals in the grate, and a row of brick cottages with slate roofs, and the rents have not been raised since 1810. That is £9,000. It did not come from half-crowns, Papa. Who is the subscriber? Her father's face had not moved. I do not know, he said. And Verity Hollis said, into the silence, without any pleasure at all, you wrote to him twice. In 1811. You sent his money back, and you wrote that the fund could not be seen to take the money of the man who did it, and then in the 3rd quarter you wrote again and said the fund would take it if there were no name upon it. Those letters are in a box, in Mr. Wick's room at Stainforth Hall, in your own hand, with your own seal. You have known his name for 9 years. You have preached against him from his own pulpit every Lent for 9 years, on his money. And in January of last year, you brought me to his house in your carriage, and left me in a cold room for an hour, so that you could sell me to him for the living of Wyckham. Somebody at the back of the assembly rooms at Haverdale dropped a glass. And he refused you, said Verity. Twice say that too, Papa. He refused you twice. And you told him you would mention my hour in Haverdale, and so he bought you off with a rectory and married me to stop you saying my name. And he has been sitting in a dark room for 10 years, letting this county call him a monster, and paying for your reputation. And the last thing on earth he would ever have done is stand up in this room and tell you what I have just told you. Which is why I have done it. She turned to the doors at the back and nodded once, and the doors opened. They came in their good coats. Mr. Wick first, and then Bart Naylor with his stumps in the sleeves of a coat made for him a fortnight before by a tailor at Durham, and then Jem Tull with his mother's arm through his, Hannah Tull in her black, in the 3rd row, had stood up when the doors opened, and had got out of her row, and had gone up the middle of the assembly rooms at Haverdale to take her son's arm and bring him in herself. And then Ridley, and Fenwick, and Hale, and Soden, and Craggs, and Buick, and Armstrong, and Dodd, and last of all, walking by himself with his hands at his sides, Dan Ockley, who had not spoken in 10 years. 11 men. In the light. In front of the whole county, at the 10th annual dinner of the Marley Cross Pit Widows' Fund in the Assembly Rooms at Haverdale. Nobody said anything at all. There was nothing in that room but 240 people, looking at what they had spent 10 years not looking at. And then the Duke of Stainforth got up. He came forward to the front of the platform, with the light on the whole of him, both sides, nothing turned away and nothing hidden, and he stood in front of the county that sold cards of him at his own park gate. And he did not clear himself. I signed the order, he said. I did not read it. 20 men and boys are dead of my signature, and there is no defense of it. And my wife has told you the truth, and you will hear no other from me. These 11 are not my defense either. They are what I have instead of one. He stopped. He looked down the room at the 11 of them standing in the middle of it. I would be obliged, said Tobias Vaughan, if somebody would find them chairs. Lady Bassett rose first. She was 61. She had not sent a card to Stainforth Hall in 9 years. She had sold the beast in her drawing-room every Thursday for a decade. And she was, above all things, a woman who knew which way a room had gone. She rose, and she went out into the middle of the floor, and she gave Bart Naylor her own chair, and then Lady Celia Bourne rose, white to the lips, and gave hers, and then the bank rose, and the brewery, and the whole of the second row, and in a minute and a half there was not a person sitting down in the assembly rooms at Haverdale, except 11 burned men and Dan Ockley, who had a chair brought for him by a duchess. Verity went back to her husband and took his right hand, the ruined one, the one in the black glove, that had held on to a rope for longer than a hand can, and drew it through her arm and held it there, in front of all of them, and did not let go. That was the 2nd of February, 1820. Her father kept Wyckham. He kept it 11 more years, until he died in it. A living is for life, and it could not be taken back, and Verity would not have taken it back if she could. He is rector of Wyckham, her husband said once, and I cannot undo it. He is the price of you. I would pay it again tomorrow. What her father did not keep was the county. There was no scene, and no scandal, and nobody ever cut him. He simply found, over the following year, that he was asked to preach at fewer places, and consulted about less, and that when the Funds Committee met at Haverdale in the spring, the chair was taken by Mrs. Hannah Toole of Fellgate, who could not write her own name and did not need to, and who ran it for 22 years and never once read a subscription list aloud. Susan came to Stainforth in the April and stayed 11 weeks, and married, 2 years after, a Durham surgeon with no money and a good laugh, and was happy, and told her children the whole story every Christmas. And the shutters stayed open. They were open on the morning in May, when Verity came down early and found her husband on the south lawn with a chisel, taking the 6-penny card of the Beast of Stainforth off the park gate, where the man from Haverdale had nailed it 10 years before, and nobody had ever quite had the authority to take it down. They were open on the Sunday in June when the wives came up from Fellgate, and the East Gallery was full of children, and Verity, coming along it with a jug, heard Ockley's wife say, "Dan, the lad's got a place at the drawing school," and heard, after a silence of perhaps 4 seconds, in a voice like a nail coming out of old wood, 1 syllable. "Aye," said Dan Ockley. Verity Vaughan stood in the corridor outside her own east gallery with a jug of lemonade in her hands, and cried for the second time in her life, quietly, so as not to spoil it, and then went in and did not say a single word about it, because there are things you do not make a thing about. And she had married the man who taught her which. They dined together at 8, every night of that year and of the years after it, with the candle in the middle of the table. There is a house in that county, with a south front 200 feet long, and if you go by it on the north road on a winter night, you can see it from 3 miles off, because every window in it is lit, and there is not a shutter closed on it anywhere. And it is said in Haverdale that the Duchess will not have them closed, not in the coldest weather, not for anything, and that the shutter hook hangs on its own nail by the drawing-room window, where anybody at all might reach it. Thank you for staying to the end of this story. Tell us in the comments which city you are listening from tonight, and whether you would have opened the shutters, and subscribe so the next one finds you.